Most of us have things in our home that could probably use an update. I am no exception, and today we are doing just that. Hey there, my name is Yaomi. I am your Latina next door. Welcome back to Mi Casa, where I share high-end home decor and DIYs on a budget, as well as extreme before and after room transformations. If that's something you enjoy, please make sure to hit like and subscribe so that you too can become part of the familia. So I have a few things in my home that I brought over from when we moved that I still hadn't really done anything with. They've been in the basement, so I decided to bring them out and do something with them. I also got a couple of little thrifted finds that I thought would be a good time to do something with them. So that is what I am tackling today, and I hope you enjoy what I do. So I had purchased 2 of these metal wall shelves. I got them off Facebook Marketplace for only $10 for the pair. However, they didn't have the glass inserts that were in them originally. They had broken. All they needed was a good cleaning. I actually liked the way the metal looked, the way it was. All we needed to do was create some shelves for these, and we actually had some of the shiplap paneling left over from when we made over our pantry last year, so I decided to go ahead and use whatever scraps we had left from that. So Nelson quickly measured and cut those really easily for me with the circular saw. After I had all of my boards cut, it was time to paint. And what I did was I took some of my sandy blonde DIY paint and lightened it up a little bit with some white Swan to get kind of like a light, really light beige color. And I decided to paint both sides of these. I didn't want the open shelving to be a different color underneath when you looked at them. So I'm starting with the underside first. And since this was originally shiplap paneling, I made sure to put the side with any grooves on the underside of each shelf and use the other side that was nice and smooth for the top part of the shelf. And for this project, I wanted to make sure I had nice full coverage. So I did go ahead and do 2 coats of paint all over the little shelf pieces. Now I thought it would be really nice to add some sort of pattern onto these little shelves, make them look a little bit more vintage or cottagey, if you will. And IOD has this brand new stamp release of an old vintage style newspaper, and I thought this would be perfect for this project. Now I'm still really new to Iron Orchid Designs and all of their products. So if you are new too, what you do is when you get one of these brand new, you have to get like a fine grit sandpaper and just sand the stamp a little bit, and this will help the ink kind of attach much better onto the stamp and get more of the ink on there. That way you have a much nicer stamp transfer on your piece. And next you add your ink onto an ink pad, and then you just press down on it evenly, trying to get as much of that ink onto your design. And this is actually a whole lot of fun. This is the second time I've used these, and they just come out so beautiful after you place them on your painted surfaces. And all you do is lay your stamp down, apply a little bit of even pressure throughout, and then pull it back. And you can re-ink every single time you use, or you can continue using your stamp for a more faded look. That one's totally up to you. After all of the stamps had dried, it was time to seal everything. I wanted to make sure that none of this would get damaged after it was completed. So I used some of my DIY paint clear wax. You guys know I love this stuff. And this wax, along with any DIY paints that I use on my channel, are all available on my website to purchase. Simply go to my homepage and click the top right corner and scroll down until it says DIY paint, and you can find the entire selection of colors and sizes that you can order so that you can use these paints as well. And so all I had to do was brush on the wax and make sure everything was nice and covered. Let this cure overnight, and then the following day just come back with a lint-free cloth and buff it all out to give it the nice waxy smooth sheen that just looks so beautiful, and your wax is set to go. Now it might look a little splotchy as if the ink is being smeared all over by the wax, but I promise you it is not, and you will see in just a sec. For this next DIY, I'm going to be making over these bar stools that I've had in our garage ever since we moved into this house. They were a flip that I did in my last home, and I just haven't used them, and they're just basically taking up space. So I thought I would give it a go and just make these over again and see what I could come up with this time. So the first thing we did was remove the felt pads from the bottom of the stool legs, and I also removed the ribbon that I had placed. This was a Serena and Lily dupe that I did a long time ago, and so I just removed all of this. That way I can start with a clean slate. And since the bottoms of the chairs were a little scuffed, I went through everything with a sander so I can smooth that part out a little bit. Now I thought it would be fun to go a little bit more coastal and try this Bohemian Blue from a DIY paint. You guys know that I love the color blue, and it's been a while since I've painted with it, and I thought that this would be a fun little project to try this on. Because it's something small and simple, it's just nice to try something with a little pop of color as an accent piece. And you guys know that I love neutrals and I love keeping things calm and cool, but I thought for something like this, it would be definitely fun to try. So I got my brush out and began painting the legs of these stools. And then tragedy struck, and I spilled my DIY paint all over the floor. Yeah, it was pretty bad, but I did manage to save most of it. I picked up a scraper and I began literally scooping it back into my little container. Oh, there's a first time for everything. Anyways, so after that, I decided to go back to painting because that is all I could do at this point. And so I just applied a nice coat of paint all over the stools. Now, this paint is pretty thick and pretty pigmented, and since I'm going to a darker color, it didn't really need a full 2 coats. I did 1 coat, and then I would come back in and touch up any areas that needed any more paint. And when I got towards the bottom of the stool, I would just flip it over and then begin to paint the bottom part of the legs, as well as any parts of the spindles underneath that I might have missed. After the paint had dried, I took my clear wax out and began to apply it all over. And as I apply the wax, you can see that it deepens and enhances that Bohemian Blue color. Now, because there was such a stark contrast between the blue and the white on the seat, I decided to distress the chairs a little bit. And unfortunately, I don't know what happened to that footage. My camera did take a fall while we were filming the outdoor space that we just finished. So I'm not sure if for some reason it just didn't record when I hit the button record. But as you can see, there's little pieces that I have sanded off with a 220 grit sandpaper, and I just decided to distress it to make it look a little bit more cottagey and used. And what I'm doing here is applying some black wax to the edges, the corners, the little nooks and crevices on the inside where the spindles meet the legs of the chair, to just deepen those edges and give it more of an antique old finish. And once I apply my wax with a smaller brush, I kind of go back in with a lint-free cloth, and I tend to wipe off any excess or try to blend it in as much as possible so that there's no harsh lines. And while I don't do a lot of furniture transformations on my channel, I do really enjoy it, and I used to do it a lot more, and now I'll be getting back to it as well. I've got a couple more pieces, larger pieces, that I'm going to be sharing with you all here that I'm going to be transforming and already started working on actually, so I can't wait to share those with you. This is actually my first time working with black wax, and I can't wait to experiment more with it. It's just so much fun to see what you can do with a piece that has literally no character at all, and what you can add to it to give it dimension simply by applying paint or wax or scuffing it. But I had a lot of fun with these little chairs. The next thing I did was I sanded down the seats, trying to get the glossy finish off, and then expose the edge of the bar stool seat so that it can have a little nice edge that was also distressed. Next, I took my dark and decrepit liquid patina, which is a stain as well as a sealer, and I decided to apply it to this white painted top to give it a faux wood look. Now you can use this to stain raw wood just like I did with my Look for Less mirror dupe that I created in my last video. If you haven't seen it, I'll go ahead and link to it in the description box below. But all I did was took a brush and just applied it to the top of the stool in long even strokes, and it created a faux wood effect. Now, depending on the look that you're going for, you can either use the brush for a nice accentuated wood grain look, or you can apply it with a lint-free cloth for something a little bit more subtle. And I kind of played with both, trying to figure out which one I wanted. Eventually I did go with a more substantial wood grain look, but either way it works just fine. So after applying this to the seats, I let it cure overnight, and this is how they turned out. The next items that I've had in my basement ever since we moved here, we actually built these candle wall sconces in my last house, and honestly they were just too rustic for our more cottage style home, so I decided to give them a little makeover and spruce them up for spring. So I took out my Gypsy DIY paint again. You all know that I have enjoyed incorporating this color throughout this spring in my home, and I've done so many projects already with this color that I thought this would be perfect to add on to these so that I can just coordinate it with my current color scheme. So I applied a liberal amount of paint onto these wall sconces. Now I didn't want it to look absolutely perfect, so I'm just doing one coat of paint for everything, making sure that I get coverage, but if there's a little bit of the wood grain that does not get filled in, it's totally fine. After the paint was dry, I took a fine grit sanding block and began to distress all of the edges. Next, I began to apply the clear wax. Now, it could be added on with a brush or a lint-free cloth. It just depends on where you're applying it and how easily you can access. For the little harder places, I did use the cloth instead. And finally, once the wax was dry, I decided to apply some white wax onto the top to highlight some of the areas as well as some of the wood grain on these wall sconces. Now, I just dry brushed it on and would go from the edges in, kind of again highlighting the edges and any of that wood grain. And I just dry brushed it on as I saw fit. Now, this was all there was to this makeover. You can use it just as is, or you can add votives or a glass vase, of fixing it on there to make sure it doesn't fall off, to make it look even more higher end. Now, for the last little piece, I am going to be bringing this little pot of faux plants that I got at Goodwill for $1.09 back to life. It has some yellow splotches of paint over it. It's missing some of the greenery, and the paint job is just not there anymore. Some of the paint is chipping off, and I could not resist picking this up because I literally saw similar pots like this at Target that were not much bigger than this for $10. And I thought this was totally cute. You can put it on a small shelf or on a tray. So I had to fix it. And all I did was use some of DIY Paint's letterpress gray, and with a stencil brush, I began to stipple the paint onto the surface of the little pot. By stippling it on, you create a nice texture. And I would apply a little bit of paint, and then I would dry it with my blow dryer, and then I would put more paint and apply it. Using the blow dryer would dry the paint faster, leaving that stippled effect on the surface, creating that really pretty texture, and drying it faster so that I can continue working. Now I'm going for a cement look on this little pot. So I would do the very first base coat in that letterpress gray, make sure all of my texture was in there, and then I would come back with some of my white Swan and incorporate it with a little bit of that gray paint and mix it throughout the surface of the pot to give it that variation that you get with a cement. And this part is honestly really simple. You just add more gray where you want more gray, or more white where you want more white, and you just keep working it into the surface of the little pot until you get your desired final look. And it's just a lot of fun because you can create so much different texture with this and give it your own look and make it look like authentic stone, even though it's just a little ceramic pot. And finally, to spruce up the greenery portion of the pot, I had these leftover sprigs from an old bush that I had created another arrangement from, and I just cut it up, and with the help of some hot glue, I inserted it into the styrofoam and just filled up the little pot again with some greenery to make it look like it was brand new. And that was all there was to fixing this cute little faux plant. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up. And let me know in the comments below which one of these projects is your favorite. And honestly, I love those little shelves. I just don't know where to put them. So if you guys have any ideas on what I can do with them, where I can place them, I would definitely appreciate it because they ended up looking so cute. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going to put them. So I appreciate any ideas that you all may have. I will see you guys back here next week with another home decor and DIY video. In the meantime, I have some videos right here that you might enjoy. Until then, adios.